Welcome to DozeTales. I'm Jimmy, your host. Tonight, we're going to drift gently through the quiet corners of history, uncovering stories that most people never hear. So dim the lights, get cozy, and let the whispers of the past guide you to a calm and peaceful state. Whether you're here to relax, learn, or just fall asleep to gentle tales, you're in the right place.
Tonight, we're settling into something a little different, but still perfectly cozy, mildly nerdy, and absolutely guaranteed to slow down your brain activity until it resembles a late-night Windows 95 screensaver. So, dim the lights. Maybe flop onto your couch like a retired walrus, and let your eyes get just heavy enough that you pretend you're listening out of curiosity, but we both know what's coming next. Tonight, we're gently floating through the long, strange, and occasionally chaotic evolution of the weapons used by U.S. Navy SEALs, from the awkward beginnings to the very polished, of course they use that, modern era. And yes, this is not an action-packed story. We're not storming anything, we're not fast-roping anywhere. We are simply observing, from the safety of your warm blanket, how elite commandos kept switching their favorite toys over the past 60-ish years. Think of this like a sleepy shopping tour through history's most expensive gun catalog. Let's begin. The SEALs before they had cool gear, 1940s to early 1960s. So, before the Navy SEALs existed as the cool, sunglasses-wearing amphibious wizards we think of today, there were the UDTs, Underwater Demolition Teams. Picture a bunch of incredibly fit guys wearing almost nothing. Like, seriously, their early uniform was basically swim trunks, fins, and optimism. And because stealthy underwater swimmers in the 1940s weren't exactly packing heat, their early weapons were mostly knives, explosives, and a questionable amount of determination. That was it. If something went wrong, their backup was swim faster. But once the 1960s rolled in, and the Navy said, let's make a new elite unit with more weapons and fewer exposed kneecaps, the SEALs officially formed in 1962. And with them came the earliest generation of guns that, frankly, looked like they came from a garage sale of leftover World War II props. Let's gently glide into those.
The first SEAL guns, or the "we work with what we have" era, 1960s. In the early years, SEAL Teams 1 and 2 didn't have special gear just for them. They grabbed whatever the Navy and Army didn't mind sharing. So the SEAL Armory started with 1. The M1 carbine, the lightweight rifle that every branch kept because it was cute and easy to carry. The SEALs used it for beach recon, jungle patrols, looking slightly under-equipped next to enemies with AK-47s. But hey, it was light, it shot bullets, and no one had invented anything better yet. 2. The Colt 1911, the classic .45 pistol that basically said, "Hi, I'm from 1911. I still work. You're welcome." The SEALs loved it because it hit hard, it worked when wet, and it had strong "my grandpa used this" energy. 3. The M3 grease gun. Imagine a weapon that looks like a plumber designed it after a long day. That's the grease gun. It was small, cheap, ugly, and surprisingly reliable. The SEALs took it because it did the job and didn't complain. 4. The Stoner 63. Ah yes, the Stoner 63, the rifle that tried so hard to be everything at once that it became a cult classic. You could turn it into a rifle, a carbine, a light machine gun, a belt-fed machine gun, basically the Lego set of guns. SEALs absolutely adored this thing. It was their identity for years. It jams sometimes, but, we don't judge. Everyone struggles. And then Vietnam happened, which meant the SEALs suddenly needed weapons that worked better in humidity, mud, rain, That random monsoon that showed up whenever someone said, "The weather's nice today." Time for the next evolution. The Vietnam years, when SEALs started collecting weapons like Pokemon, late 1960s to 1970s. Vietnam was the era when SEALs famously said, "Yes, we'll take one of everything, thanks." Their missions required high mobility, quiet movement, and the ability to switch from stealth to loud chaos instantly. So their arsenal expanded into the CAR-15, also known as the Colt Commando.
This was basically the baby version of the M16. Shorter, louder, meaner. The SEALs adored it. Perfect for jungle ambushes, jumping out of boats, and looking extremely cool in 1970s photos. 2. Suppressed weapons. This is where things started sounding like spy movies. The stars were the Mk-22 Mod 0 Hush Puppy, a modified Smith & Wesson pistol with a giant suppressor, used to neutralize guard dogs. Yes, that's why it got the name. Dark? Yes. Effective? Also yes. The Sten and Sterling suppressed SMGs. Britain said, "You can borrow these," and SEALs said, "Great, we'll take 10. The Swedish K, or Carl Gustav-M45, the gun that everybody loved because it worked even after you dropped it into a puddle, a swamp, or probably a bowl of yogurt. It just didn't care. 3. Explosives, because of course. The SEALs were demolition men at heart. They used C4, time charges, limpet mines, basically anything that boomed underwater. All used quietly, methodically, and absolutely not in a Hollywood way. This era built the SEAL identity, the quiet professionals with weapons for every mood. But after Vietnam, things got high-tech. Well, high-tech for the 1980s, which essentially means had a rail and didn't jam as often. The 1980s. The SEALs discover modernization slowly but surely. This era is when the SEALs started looking more like the ones we recognize today. 1. The MP5, the German supermodel of guns, smooth, reliable, used by every cool Special Forces unit in every 1980s movie ever. SEALs used variants like the MP5A3, MP5SD, integrally suppressed, whisper quiet. The MP5SD was basically so quiet that enemies heard the brass hitting the floor more than the shot itself. It became the SEAL's signature for hostage rescues, shipboard operations, and anything requiring, "Please don't wake the whole building." Then there's the M60E3, a lighter, trimmed-down version of the classic M60 machine gun. Still heavy, still loud, still very Rambo energy. SEALs used it for fire support, especially during long deployments. Then, Remington 700 sniper rifles. These rifles were accurate.
Sig Sauer pistols, the P226 becoming iconic. The Navy needed a gun that worked underwater. Glocks failed the SALT test. Berettas also struggled. SIG stepped in like, "Hi, we're Swiss-German, we make things that run perfectly forever." The SEALs said, "Great, we'll take thousands." Thus, the P226 Mk25 became their standard sidearm. 4. More suppressed weapons. The SEALs continued their quiet obsession with being quiet. Suppressed M4s, suppressed MP5s, suppressed pistols, suppressed everything. If it could be made quiet, they made it quiet. Even their quietness had quietness. And that, ladies and gentlemen, trying to fall asleep, we have slowly drifted from barefoot dudes with knives to 1990s operators with laser-equipped everything. In the next part, we will float into the flashy era of the global war on terror, modern AR platforms, MK-18s, SCARs, SIG MCXs, fancy night vision wizardry, and modern sniper rifles that probably cost more than your car. All right, welcome back, friends. If you're still awake after part 1, congratulations. You've basically unlocked Navy SEAL level mental endurance. Tonight, we're drifting gently into the humid, mosquito-powered chaos of the Vietnam War. And yes, this is the era where SEAL weapons get weird. Because of course they do.
So go ahead, readjust your blanket, maybe inhale slowly like someone who pretends to meditate, but really just wants an excuse to zone out, and let's float into the swampy, moonlit world of 1960s riverbanks, where Navy SEALs were quietly experimenting with every gun the U.S. military would let them borrow, and a few the military definitely did not expect them to borrow. We're heading into the jungle now. Calmly. Slowly. No jump scares, I promise. The Stoner 63. The SEALs is a build-a-gun. So, picture this. It's 1963. American infantry is carrying the early M16, which still jams more than a cheap stapler. Meanwhile, the Navy SEALs are looking for something modular, reliable, and lightweight. Basically, the IKEA furniture version of a gun, but without the emotional trauma of missing bolts. Enter the Stoner 63. A weapon designed by Eugene Stoner, the same guy who made the AR-15, because apparently he woke up one morning and thought, I should design a gun that can turn into literally 6 different guns. The Stoner 63 could become a rifle, a carbine, a belt-fed light machine gun, a top-fed LMG, a commando SMG-style weapon, and probably a toaster if SEALs tried hard enough. The SEALs loved it. Of course they did. It was light, reliable, accurate, and looked like something a 12-year-old would draw after drinking too much Mountain Dew. But the best part? It was quieter than the M60 and easier to move around in marshy jungle mud, which, if you have never experienced Southeast Asian mud, imagine stepping into a warm pudding that holds grudges. SEALs carried the Stoner 63 on nighttime river raids. Long bursts, controlled fire. Calm and steady. Everything you'd expect from men who trained themselves to swim into enemy camps at 2 a.m. because sleep is for civilians. The weapon eventually faded from mainstream use, but in the SEAL community, it is practically a legend. The kind of weapon that gets talked about in hushed tones, like a discontinued candy bar. M16 variants, or why don't we try that again? The early M16 had issues. And by issues, I mean it jammed so often you could use it as a metaphor for toxic relationships. But SEALs didn't just accept the problem. Nope. They fixed it themselves. Quietly. Casually. Like, fine, I will do your job for you energy. They used better lubricants, cleaned it religiously, swapped out parts, and treated the weapon with a kind of affection it probably did not deserve. Eventually, SEALs got the XM177E2, basically a short-barreled M16 with a cute little moderator on the front. It wasn't a suppressor, but it helped reduce muzzle flash, which mattered at night. Because nothing ruins stealth like a blinding fireball that says, "Hi, yes, I'm over here." The XM177E2 became a SEAL favorite in close-quarters jungle raids. Light, handy, decently quiet. The kind of gun that makes you think, yeah, I could wander through a mangrove swamp with this. The CAR-15. Small, loud, and annoyed. The CAR-15 was basically the XM177E2's chaotic older brother. Short barrel, loud muzzle, flash so bright you could use it to signal aircraft. But SEALs loved it anyway. Because shorter rifles mean less snagging on vines, branches, and whatever wildlife is lurking in the darkness, silently judging your life choices. It worked great for point-blank ambushes, close-quarter canal boat raids, jungle hut entries, and general commando activities. If you're imagining silent SEAL operators slipping through Vietnam like ghosts, yes, that's accurate. But they also sometimes carried these little fire-breathing carbines that lit up the night like someone had thrown a Roman candle into a rainforest, and somehow that mix worked. The M60. The, yes, let's bring a machine gun into a canoe decision. The M60. Affectionately called the pig, because subtlety is for other weapons. If the Stoner 63 was a sleek, modular Lego set, The M60 was a giant metal statement piece that said, "I will spray bullets across this entire tree line whether you like it or not." So, naturally, SEALs took it into boats. Yes, boats. Because nothing says naval special warfare like balancing a 23-pound machine gun on a tiny rivercraft while silently drifting through fog. M60 roles for SEALs included suppressing enemy riverbank positions, covering extraction teams, supporting ambushes from boats, and making sure the enemy understood that America had brought the loud option. Was it heavy? Yes. Did SEALs love it anyway? Also yes. Imagine a quiet nighttime river raid with crickets chirping, fireflies glowing, and then suddenly an M60 opening up with the subtlety of a blender full of gravel. Pure poetry. The M79 grenade launcher. The thump. Now, let's slow down, because the M79 deserves a moment. It's a single-shot, break-open grenade launcher shaped like a shotgun. A calm, simple weapon. Almost wholesome, if you ignore the explosives part. SEALs adored it, because it was lightweight, reliable, accurate, and made a very satisfying thump sound. In the middle of a jungle patrol, that sound was like the acoustic equivalent of a sigh. The M79 was perfect for ambushes, softening enemy positions, and creating controlled chaos with a kind of relaxed efficiency. They even modified it into a short version called the Pirate Gun, because of course they did.
The M72 LAW, the just-in-case tube. The M72 light anti-tank weapon barely fits into the SEAL aesthetic. It's basically a cardboard tube that fires rockets, but SEALs took them anyway. For structures, for bunkers, for the occasional surprise enemy truck. Did it look dramatic? Absolutely not. It looked like someone carrying a collapsible camping chair. But it worked, and SEALs loved anything lightweight that could remove obstacles quickly. Silenced .22 pistols because stealth exists. This is where things get delightfully weird. SEALs used high-standard HDM silenced .22 pistols and modified Ruger .22 pistols. Tiny guns, tiny bullets, maximum stealth energy. These pistols were not meant for firefights. They were meant for disabling guard dogs, quietly removing streetlights, or eliminating sentries without waking half the jungle. They were so quiet that SEALs often wondered if they even fired, which is ideal. Shotguns, the SEAL chaotic option. The pump-action Ithaca Model 37 was a favorite. Bottom ejecting, simple, nearly impossible to jam. SEALs used shotguns for room clearing, ambush shock, and jungle fights where visibility was basically zero. In thick vegetation, buckshot spreads like, well, buckshot. No aim, just calm, wide dispersal. A soothing concept, really. The Swedish K, the hipster gun of Vietnam. The Carl Gustaf M-45, affectionately called the Swedish K, was a simple, cheap, open-bolt submachine gun made of stamped steel. It was the type of weapon that looked like it came from someone's garage workshop, which is exactly why the SEALs loved it. It was ridiculously reliable, resistant to mud and water, smooth in full auto, and easy to suppress. Imagine a gun that continues working after being dipped in a swamp, dragged through mangroves, and possibly insulted. That's the Swedish K. It became a SEAL signature weapon before the M16 family replaced it. But ask any Vietnam-era SEAL today, and they will talk about the Swedish K like people talk about their first car. A little ugly, a little outdated, but very reliable. Mark II fragmentation grenades, the classic pineapple. Yes, standard grenades. Nothing fancy, nothing experimental. Just the classic pineapple-shaped hand grenade. SEALs used them for ambushes, enemy bunkers, and making sure nighttime missions went exactly as planned. Not much else to say here. They worked, they were thrown, they exploded. Calmly, predictably, comfortingly.
Underwater weapons because SEALs. Since SEALs actually fight underwater sometimes, thanks Navy, they had access to special gear like the Mk1 underwater defense gun. It fired steel darts, not bullets, darts. Because bullets do not behave underwater unless you enjoy random physics experiments. The Mk1 wasn't very glamorous. It looked like a flashlight with identity issues, but it worked for close-range underwater engagements, which thankfully were rare. Even frogs don't want to fight underwater. The Vietnam SEAL loadout, a calm summary. Your average SEAL in Vietnam could be carrying a Stoner 63 or a Car 15, a suppressed pistol, grenades, a knife, an M79, and maybe a random anti-tank launcher just because. Their gear was chaotic but efficient, like a portable toolbox for solving problems with varying levels of subtlety. In the end, Vietnam defined what SEAL weapons would become: light, modular, silent when needed, aggressive when required, and always chosen by operators who preferred results over regulations. Drifting out of the jungle into the future. All right, take a deep breath. We're slowly stepping out of the thick, humid darkness of Southeast Asia now, moving toward the 1980s and 90s, the era where Navy SEAL weapons start standardizing, modernizing, and becoming icons. In Part 3, we'll explore the rise of the MP5, the birth of the M4, the development of SEAL Team 6's specialized arsenals, early suppressed rifles, and the transition into the global war on terror. All right, so let's drift back into the soft-lit, slightly salt-sprayed timeline where the early Navy SEALs were trying to figure out what in the world their armory should even look like. Because remember, when SEAL Teams 1 and 2 were officially created in 1962, the U.S. military didn't have a folder labeled "Ideal Guns for Secretly Swimming into Enemy Harbors." Of course they did not. Why would they be prepared? That would make too much sense. Instead, SEALs inherited a weird mix of WW2 leftovers, experimental guns that nobody else wanted to use, and whatever the logistics officer could find in a warehouse that week. So Part 3 is basically the era of, hey, this might work, probably, just don't drop it in the ocean. Let's settle in. Deep breath. Shoulders relax. We're gliding toward Vietnam now. Slowly, where the early SEALs would build the foundation of modern special operations weaponry. A very sleepy overview of the Cold War SEAL armory. Picture the early 1960s. The world is nervous. Everyone is pointing missiles at everyone else. And yet the weapons being issued to American frogmen still feel like the military raided a dusty museum. We had wooden stock rifles, Sterling submachine guns that looked like plumbing equipment, shotguns older than most of the guys carrying them. But the SEALs made it work because that's the thing about elite units. If you hand them a potato launcher, they'll find a way to break physics with it. Let's float through the highlights.
The M1 carbine, because apparently it was still around. Yes, the little M1 carbine, that friendly, lightweight rifle from W2 that somehow refused to retire. By the early SEAL years, you'd think this thing would be in a museum somewhere behind glass, maybe under a "Please do not blow the dust off" sign. But nope. Early SEALs loved it for one reason. It didn't weigh as much as emotional baggage. It fired a soft-shooting .30 caliber round that wouldn't knock your shoulder out of alignment. And it was short, perfect for boarding boats or sneaking around jungles. Was it powerful? Not really. Was it accurate? Let's just say yes, in a very generous participation trophy way. But the SEALs used it because sometimes the best weapon is just the one that doesn't drag you underwater. The M2 carbine, same weapon, just in energy drink mode. The M2 was the M1 carbine's hyperactive sibling. Someone in the Pentagon looked at the original and said, "What if it shot faster and made everyone slightly nervous?" So they slapped a full auto setting on it. Early SEALs used it during the Vietnam buildup because it was tiny, controllable, and familiar. Imagine carrying a lightweight little buzzsaw, but one from the 1940s. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't flashy, it wasn't even particularly modern, but it worked well enough, especially in thick vegetation, where firing 950 rounds per minute felt like the exact opposite of a rational decision, and therefore perfect for the 1960s. The Sten and Sterling SMGs, the British plumbing collection. Somehow, early Navy SEALs got their hands on British-made submachine guns, because when you're building a special operations unit, obviously your first thought is, let's give them British pipes welded into the shape of a gun. The Sten was famously ugly. It looked like a home improvement project gone wrong. The Sterling was marginally more attractive if you enjoy weapons that resemble high-end vacuum cleaner attachments. But they worked underwater adjacent, and they fired the 9mm cartridge, which was easier to manage during close-quarters missions. These weren't long-term solutions. They were more like temporary roommates, useful, but definitely not permanent. The M79 grenade launcher, the thump gun that everyone loved too much. Ah yes, the M79, affectionately called the blooper or the thumper, because nothing lulls you to sleep quite like a slow, gentle thump followed by distant chaos. This single-shot 40mm launcher became a SEAL favorite in Vietnam. It was practically designed for jungle warfare. Lightweight, simple, and capable of sending explosive grenades arcing gracefully like a slightly unhinged rainbow. Of course, reloading it required you to break the weapon open like a giant shotgun shell, but the SEALs didn't mind. If anything, they enjoyed the vibe firing one round, then very calmly opening the launcher like they were about to offer it a cup of tea. The Ithaca 37 shotgun, the pump until something happens gun. The Ithaca Model 37 wasn't fancy. It didn't have rails, it didn't have attachments. It didn't even eject shells out the side. It ejected downward, which early SEALs loved because it didn't splash water in your face. It was also a slam-fire shotgun, meaning you could hold the trigger down and pump the action repeatedly, turning the gun into a very dramatic sprinkler. In dark, wet jungle conditions, this thing was practically a best friend. Entering Vietnam, where SEAL weaponry finally levels up. By the mid-1960s, SEALs were done playing with leftover antiques. They needed modern gear. So now we slide into the heart of Part 3, Vietnam, the birthplace of the SEAL weapon ecosystem. Here's where things get interesting. New rifles arrive, new suppressed weapons appear, entire categories of experimental guns get tested, and SEALs become the unofficial beta testers for modern special operations. Let's drift into the highlights, slowly, softly, like a frogman sneaking past a half-asleep guard.
The XM16E1, the prototype that loved to jam. Before the M16 rifle became the iconic American standard, there was the experimental version, the XM16E1. SEALs got it early because the government thought, who should test this new rifle? Probably the guys who need their weapons to never jam. Makes sense. Perfect logic. The early M16s had issues: jamming, corrosion, ammo powder that burned dirtier than expected. But the SEALs liked the rifle's futuristic vibe. It was light, fast, easy to handle, and once improvements were made, the SEALs embraced it fully, eventually moving on to more specialized versions, which we'll get to later. For now, picture a sleek plastic and aluminum rifle that constantly needed emotional support. The XR-15, Colt Commando, the short king of Vietnam. This is where things get good. The XR-15, also known as the Colt Commando, became the early SEAL signature rifle. short barrel, collapsible stock, lightweight frame, perfect for riverine operations and jungle raids. It had an absolutely ridiculous muzzle flash, like a small sun being born at the end of the barrel. But SEALs didn't care. They loved it. The XR-15 rapidly became the SEAL rifle of the Vietnam War. If the M16 was a proper, sensible adult, the XR-15 was the loud, slightly chaotic younger sibling who did backflips in the yard. The Stoner 63, the SEAL's experimental Lego gun. Ah, yes. The Stoner 63, a modular weapon system designed by Eugene Stoner, the same guy who invented the AR-15. The Stoner 63 could transform into a rifle, a carbine, a machine gun, a belt-fed light support weapon, technically even a weird top-fed gun nobody used. It was basically the Transformers franchise, but made of steel and questionable reliability choices. SEALs used the Stoner 63A Commando variant heavily in Vietnam. Why? Because it was absurdly lightweight for a machine gun, and SEALs appreciated anything that let them carry more ammo without sinking like a stone. It jammed sometimes, parts wore out quickly, and the supply chain never caught up. But early SEALs adored it. The Stoner 63 remains one of the most iconic special operations weapons ever issued. The Swedish K, the most chill submachine gun of all time. Technically called the Carl Gustaf M/45, this little green submachine gun looked plain, worked flawlessly, and refused to die. SEALs loved it because it fired in mud, it fired in water, it fired in humidity, it fired in Vietnam, it fired in its sleep, probably. When the U.S. banned importing them, SEALs panic-bought remaining stock like teenagers hoarding limited edition sneakers. The Swedish K didn't try to be cool, but it ended up being effortlessly cool anyway. Suppressed weapons make their entrance, because silence is kinda the point. Now we get into the quiet stuff. Early SEAL missions sometimes required stealth, so suppressed weapons became essential. The M22 Mod O Hush Puppy. Yes, it was literally called Hush Puppy, a suppressed Smith & Wesson pistol designed to eliminate guard dogs quietly, because sometimes the Cold War was tragically literal. It had a slide lock to prevent the action from cycling loudly. This made it quieter than a guilty whisper. Unpleasant job, necessary tool. The suppressed M3 grease gun. Imagine the World War II M3 submachine gun, but with a giant suppressor shoved onto it. Did it look elegant? Absolutely not. Did it work? Surprisingly, yes. It made a dull, soft thunk-thunk-thunk sound that fit perfectly into the sleepy vibe we're cultivating.
The Browning High Power, because every elite unit somehow ends up using it. The Browning High Power was one of the most widely used pistols on the planet. High magazine capacity, reliable, accurate enough. SEALs carried it because sometimes the simplest answer is the best one. This pistol stuck around for decades, long after it probably should have retired. The introduction of underwater weapons. Early special operations forced SEALs to experiment with strange, underwater-capable guns. Not many worked. Some barely functioned. But the Mk1 underwater defense gun and similar prototypes existed, firing little dart-like projectiles underwater. These weren't practical for combat, but the concept was important. Baby steps towards something far more deadly decades later. As we drift toward Part 4. The Vietnam era ends. The world shifts again. SEAL teams evolve. Technology moves forward.
and the weapons begin transforming from improvised, mismatched tools into highly specialized gear built specifically for elite operators. The Stoner fades away. The CR-15 gives birth to new carbines, and suppressed systems get far more advanced. In Part 4, we'll glide into post-Vietnam modernization, the rise of precision rifles, the MP5 era, and the earliest roots of the Mk-18 and SOAP-Mod platforms, the weapons that shaped SEAL teams in the 1980s and 1990s. Everything becomes sleeker, more intentional, more special operations in feel. Hey guys, welcome back. If you're still awake after Part 3, honestly, I'm impressed. If you fell asleep and woke up again, that's fine too. SEAL weapons don't mind being background noise. Most of them were literally designed to be quiet enough to sneak past a guy who's already half asleep on night guard duty somewhere in 1980s Panama. So tonight, or whatever time it is for you right now, we're floating into another phase of the SEALs' relationship with their gear. A phase where the weapons start looking less like Vietnam leftovers and more like something a hobbyist gun YouTuber would mortgage their house to buy. Let's ease into the era that most people picture when they think of modern SEAL teams. The early 2000s, aka the period where everything in the U.S. military suddenly had rails, lasers, and names that sound like rejected Marvel characters. The Mk-18, the short king of the SEAL world. So let's drift first into the not-so-humble Mk-18, the rifle beloved by SEALs, Rangers, SWCC, and probably anyone who felt the irresistible urge to turn a perfectly normal M4 into something a foot shorter. The Mk-18 is basically the M4 saying, hey, what if I shrink myself and get really good at close quarters? And of course SOCOM said yes, because SOCOM always says yes to shortening guns. It's practically a tradition. The Mk-18's barrel is just 10.3 inches, which is, yeah, small. But that's kind of the point. SEALs needed something to use in shipboarding, cramped hallways, hostage rescue, and basically any mission where, whoops, I hit the door frame again, wasn't an option. The Mk-18 was light, it was compact. It could handle all the accessories SEALs love to bolt onto things, lights, lasers, optics, more lasers because apparently one wasn't enough, and occasionally a suppressor because quiet is basically their love language. Was it perfect? Of course not. Short barrels are loud. They blast fireballs the size of medium pizzas, and they lose velocity. But SEALs loved it anyway. It was the kind of rifle that said, I'm not here to impress ballistics nerds. I'm here because I fit through the doorway. Optics, where SEALs start collecting glass like Pokemon. Alright, so this is the point in history where optics start showing up everywhere. Older SEALs, the Vietnam-era guys, probably would have looked at a holographic sight and said, why does the gun have a TV on it? But now, optics were a requirement. SEAL teams loved the EOTech 552, which essentially projected a big glowing reticle that said, put this circle on the thing you don't like, press trigger, move on. They also used ACOGs, red dots, magnifiers, and the occasional experimental optic that looked like it came from a sci-fi prop department. But let's glide gently forward, because what SEALs really cared about wasn't just seeing better. They wanted to aim better in the dark. The rise of night vision and laser pointers that could blind the moon. Night operations were the SEALs' playground, which meant night vision gear went from cool toy in the 1990s to no mission without it by the 2000s. This also meant IR lasers, the kind invisible to the naked eye, but bright as a spotlight through night vision, suddenly became mandatory. The ANPEQ-2, followed by the ANPEQ-15, became the unofficial, "hey, I'm an operator now" accessory. It gave the SEALs the ability to point lasers at things no one else could see, which probably felt a bit like being a wizard. A very tactical wizard. A wizard with no patience for loud noises. The HK-416, the rifle that made the M4 look like it needed therapy. And yes, it's the one everyone on Reddit won't stop talking about, especially the guys who think piston systems can cure loneliness. The HK-416 came about because SEALs and Delta Force had a complaint. The M4 got dirty. Like, really dirty. Like, I fired 3 mags and now it's having an existential crisis dirty. So gun companies were asked, hey, can someone make an M4 that doesn't choke on its own carbon? HK basically said, hold my schnitzel. And the HK-416 was born. A piston-driven version of the M4 that ran cleaner, cooler, and had a reputation for reliability that bordered on supernatural. It was sturdy. It was accurate. It could handle short barrels without melting itself. And it looked just cool enough to make half the special operations world whisper, I want one. SEALs adopted it in the mid-2000s. They used it on countless missions, and it went on to become part of, well, you know, a historically famous SEAL operation. We won't talk about details since we're keeping things sleepy, not dramatic. Just know that the HK-416 became the rifle everyone associated with modern SEAL missions in obscure places your phone's GPS can't find.
SCAR, the weapon that tried to replace everything and kind of didn't. Next up in the SEAL arsenal is the FN SCAR, which stands for Special Operations Forces Combat Assault Rifle. And yes, it sounds like a 14-year-old named it, but that's fine. Tactical names are always a bit dramatic. SOCOM wanted one rifle platform that could do everything: light, heavy, close range, long range, eat odd ammo types, fire in a hurricane, and probably cook dinner if you tried hard enough. FN made the SCAR-L, 5.56, and the SCAR-H, 7.62. SEALs got them, tested them, used them in the field. The result? The SCAR-H, heavy, stuck around. The SCAR-L, light, did not. Why? The SCAR-L was supposed to replace the M4, but the M4 looked at that and said, sure, good luck with that. SEALs found the SCAR-L didn't do anything massively better, and so it faded away. But the SCAR-H? SEALs loved having a lightweight 7.62 rifle that could hit hard at mid-range, perfect for breaking things behind cover or making steel plates say, ow. Precision rifles, because sometimes you need something that says, one shot only, thanks. Now let's slow our pacing even more, because precision rifles are basically the sleepy stars of the SEAL inventory. By the 2000s, SEAL sniper teams had access to MK11 Mod O, MK12 SPR, M82 Barrett, yes, the one from every video game, MK13 Mod 5, 6, AXSR, and MRAD in later years. Each of these rifles had one job: be quiet, be accurate, and please don't jam in the middle of nowhere. The MK11 was a favorite, a semi-auto sniper rifle chambered in 7.62 that made suppressed shots sound like someone politely closing a wooden door in the next room. The MK12 SPR? SEALs adored it because it was basically a laser beam disguised as a 5.56 rifle.
And the Barrett M82? Well, that thing wasn't quiet. At all. It was basically a 30-pound, please wake up the entire valley button. But it could disable vehicles, penetrate barriers, and generally ruin the day of anything mechanical. The suppressor era. Finally, guns that don't sound like thunder. By the 2000s, suppressors were everywhere in SEAL teams. Brands like Knight's Armament and Surfire became common. Guns were tuned for suppression. Some rifles even had dedicated suppressed versions. The idea wasn't movie-style silence. It was reducing recoil, flash, and hearing damage, because nothing ruins an op like giving yourself tinnitus before the mission's halfway done. Imagine a room full of SEALs all going, huh? Because no one believed in hearing protection in the 90s. Suppressors fixed that problem. Kind of. Transition towards a modular arsenal. By the late 2000s, SEAL weapon loadouts started shifting from every mission has a specific gun to we have modular systems that can become whatever we want. Weapons became Lego sets, rails everywhere, attachments for every scenario, quick change parts, custom configurations. A single rifle could do the job of 5 older ones. The days of one gun for mission type were ending. SEALs started choosing rifles the same way normal people choose phone cases, like, what setup do I feel like today? Quietly wandering into the 1990s, when SEAL gear got very tactical. Hey again, welcome back to our slow drift through Navy SEAL weaponry. If you're still awake at this point, congratulations. If not, well, that's kind of the goal, so no hard feelings. Anyway, let's just float forward into the 1990s, a decade when pretty much everything was experimenting with being extreme. Soft drinks, hair gel, cartoons, even fonts. And quietly tagging along behind all of that was the U.S. Navy SEAL arsenal, which also decided it wanted to grow up, get practical, and wear a lot more matte black. So let's ease ourselves into the era of tactical vests, Velcro enthusiasm, and guns that finally started getting rails because apparently we reached a point where people wanted to attach literally everything. The Mk-23 SOCOM pistol, the gun that was basically a refrigerator. Alright, so first up, we have this fascinating moment in history when the U.S. military decided, hey, let's design a pistol that can do basically everything. And thus the HK Mark 23 was born, a gun so big that even the people who built it probably had second thoughts. It was supposed to be a sidearm, but it had the energy of someone desperately trying to be the main character. It came with a massive silencer, a laser aiming module, and the general vibe of a pistol that had been hitting the protein powder a bit too hard. It passed every torture test thrown at it, which is great, but the thing weighed practically as much as an actual brick. SEALs respected it, admired it, and then, because they are humans with wrists, quietly began carrying smaller guns whenever possible. But the Mk-23 will forever remain the pistol equivalent of a high-performance SUV. Absolutely amazing, just maybe not what you want to carry up a ladder in the dark. Let's gently drift forward.
Next up, we have the gun that every action movie absolutely loved, even though real operators probably used it more calmly and less dramatically than Hollywood would like you to believe. The MP5SD. If the MP5 was already quiet, the SD variant was basically the introverted cousin that spoke in barely audible whispers. It had an integral suppressor, meaning it was built into the gun, so it reduced sound, muzzle flash, and pretty much any excitement whatsoever. Perfect for boarding ships, sneaking around gently, politely discouraging hostile behavior. It also had the kind of reliability HK was known for at the time, meaning it just worked, which, as it turns out, is very convenient when you need a gun to, also work. Let's slowly keep drifting through these decades. Sig Sauer P226, the sensible choice era. After experimenting with things like Desert Eagles, yes, briefly, 191s, because tradition, revolvers, because someone always loves revolvers, and the MK-23, because why not build a gun the size of a lunchbox? The SEALs decided maybe, just maybe, they wanted a handgun that wasn't also a gym workout. Enter the SIG P226. It was accurate, durable, not ridiculously huge, and didn't try too hard. Basically, imagine the responsible middle child of handguns. It just quietly did its job without needing a parade. SEALs loved it, and the gun stayed in service for decades because it didn't overcomplicate anything. Sometimes simplicity wins, and in this case, it definitely did. Now let's just float toward the long guns. M4A1 carbine. The SEALs meet the modern AR platform. The 1990s also see the SEAL teams adopting what would become their main character gun for many years, the M4A1. It was basically shorter than the M16, more modular, easier to take into tight places, and less likely to smack into door frames. And most importantly, it had rails. This was the era when operators suddenly gained the ability and desire to bolt things onto guns, like flashlights, optics, laser pointers, possibly small kitchen appliances, if allowed. The M4A1 was light, fast, accessorizable, and adaptable to any mission. Kind of like the tactical version of a modern smartphone, except instead of apps, you downloaded lasers and suppressors. Let's drift gently forward. The MK-12 SPR, when SEALs wanted something calmly precise. Now, while the M4A1 was great, sometimes SEALs wanted something slightly more refined, something that said, I support you from over there, quietly judging your marksmanship. That led to the adoption of the MK-12 SPR, Special Purpose Rifle. It was basically an M4 on a very clean diet, with better accuracy, a longer barrel, and optics that made everything feel just a little too close. It wasn't a sniper rifle, but it also wasn't not a sniper rifle. It filled that sweet spot between regular rifle and dedicated long-range tool, and it quickly became the favorite of designated marksmen who wanted something calm and predictable. Let's keep gliding. The origins of the MK-48, because someone wanted a lighter saw. SEALs used the M249 saw for years, but eventually decided they wanted something in 7.62 millimeters, but lighter. Enter the MK-48, which was basically a bigger, stronger, louder M249 that still tried its best to not break your back. It gave SEALs the long-range energy they wanted with enough portability that you could actually carry it up a hill without needing medical paperwork. And slowly, this era leads us into the 2000s, where everything gets a little more high-tech and a little more we can put optics on everything now. The quiet killers, blades, tools, and the odd things SEALs actually carry. Hey guys, welcome back to this very extended, very relaxed stroll through SEAL history. If you're still awake from the last part, well, impressive. But don't worry.
Part 6 is basically the calmest section yet. Tonight, we're drifting into something less flashy than assault rifles and underwater rocket guns. Because, believe it or not, a good chunk of SEAL gear isn't loud at all. It's quiet, old-fashioned, almost cozy in a "this could absolutely ruin someone's evening" kind of way. Let's settle in and drift through the quieter side of SEAL equipment.
The K-bar, the knife that refused to retire. Of course we start with the K-bar, because somehow, even with all the laser-guided, cyber-enhanced, titanium-coated gear floating around today, SEALs still often carry a knife designed when your great-grandfather was barely learning to walk. The K-bar entered service in WW2. It was simple, a chunk of steel, a leather handle, and the kind of dependability your ex promised but couldn't deliver. Marines loved it. Sailors loved it. Pretty much every branch went, yeah, that's good enough. SEALs adopted it early in Vietnam, mostly because it worked in mud, rain, water, and the general chaos of jungle humidity. Was it fancy? No. Was it modern? Still no. Does it keep showing up in SEAL gear lists? Absolutely yes. It's the chef's knife of special operations. Not exciting, but somehow perfect. The Fairbairn Sykes fighting knife, the drama queen of blades. Just picture a dagger designed specifically for silent, close-quarters situations. Now picture it being used by people who regularly swim into enemy harbors at night. That's the Fairbairn Sykes. It's the glamorous blade with the slender body, the symmetrical edge, and the personality of a Victorian gentleman who definitely has some unresolved issues. This dagger has a reputation. British commandos adored it, OSS agents adored it, and Navy UDTs and early SEALs went, yeah, we'll take some of that theatrical energy. Used mostly in the 50s and 60s, it eventually faded out as SEALs discovered that the knife was great for stealth and terrible for opening crates, cutting rope, or doing literally anything practical. Beautiful? Yes. Functional? Debatable. Dramatic? Always. The Benchmade SOCP and modern tactical knives. Eventually, SEALs embraced the modern era. Carbon steel, ceramic coatings, sheaths that don't look like they were made during the Great Depression. Modern SEAL knives include the Benchmade SOCP dagger. Slim, lightweight, feels like someone designed a toothpick with anger issues. Gerber Mark II, updated versions, because nothing says heritage like revamping a 1960s assassination tool. SOG SEAL Pup and SEAL Team Elite, the classic, yes, I lift weights energy. Extrema Ratio Italian blades, sharp, dramatic, probably has an ego. Modern knives focus on being multi-purpose, cutting straps, prying doors, slicing rope, and occasionally being intimidating to anyone who thinks they're in charge. The multi-tool era. Leatherman saves the day. Not all SEAL gear is designed to defeat an enemy. Some of it is designed to defeat, well, annoying little screws. Enter the multi-tool. SEALs famously carry Leatherman mutts, waves, and super tools. Why? Because when your weapon jams, your radio mount is loose, your fin strap breaks, and your teammate can't open his MRE, a multi-tool solves everything. It's the unsung hero of the modern operator, the quiet therapist in stainless steel form. No drama, no explosions, just tiny pliers doing their best. Bolt cutters, the unexpected MVP. Here's a fun fact. SEALs carry bolt cutters way more often than Hollywood suggests. Why? Because locked doors exist. Locked gates exist. Locked fences exist. And sometimes the mission is less kick down the door and more Please open this politely without alerting everyone within 3 miles. Bolt cutters are heavy, clunky, and extremely unglamorous. But they work. They've been used in hostage rescue, shipboarding, harbor sabotage, base infiltration, and we forgot the key situations. Simple, brutal, quiet. A perfect combination. Breaching charges, the not-so-quiet tools. Sometimes SEALs don't feel like using bolt cutters. Sometimes they prefer a little bit of controlled chaos. Enter the breaching charge. The modern SEAL toolkit includes water impulse charges for underwater doors, linear-shaped charges for precise cuts, beanbag charges for fast entry buildings, and thermite cutters for metal structures. Breaching is an art, a very loud, very bright art. But even that has a sleepy vibe when you imagine it from a distance, like distant fireworks, just, tactical. Throwing lines, hooks, and climbing tools. Now here's something no one tells you. SEALs climb stuff, a lot of stuff. Ship hulls, cliffs, piers, buildings, basically anything vertical. Their gear includes grapples. Yes, the Batman hook is real. Throwing lines with weighted ends, telescoping poles for boarding ships, mechanical ascenders for climbing ropes, and collapsible ladders. Imagine sneaking onto a ship in the middle of the night, waves gently rolling, moonlight shining, and someone in your team quietly mutters, "Please don't drop this hook. Please don't drop this hook." Quiet drama. Peak SEAL energy. The tomahawk phase. Tactical axe fashion era. Yes, SEALs actually used tactical tomahawks for a short era. Because, of course they did. Around the late 2000s, everyone suddenly decided that an axe was the coolest thing in the world. Tactical tomahawks flooded the market. Some SEALs tried them out. They were good for breaking locks, smashing windows, cutting through barriers, and looking intimidating in photos. But eventually, practicality won out. Tomahawks faded back into the shadows, returning to their natural habitat, the Instagram accounts of knife collectors.
Wire saws and survival tools. Because missions can go sideways, SEALs often carry covert wire saws, fire starters, signal mirrors, mini compasses, emergency fishing kits. It's very Boy Scouts, but with night vision. The wire saw is especially funny. It looks harmless, like something you'd use to cut a tiny piece of camping firewood. But with proper technique, it can slice through metal slowly, very slowly. Perfect for a sleepy video, honestly. Underwater navigation boards, the most boringly important tool ever. SEALs don't swim aimlessly when underwater. They use nav boards, which look like clipboards built by someone who really loves math. A typical board includes a compass, a depth gauge, a timer, a glowing reference grid, sometimes a basic map. They're not exciting, they're not flashy, but without them, a team could swim straight into the wrong coastline and have a very awkward evening. Chem lights, because batteries die eventually. Chem lights, glow sticks, are surprisingly common. Uses include marking cleared rooms, signaling underwater, tracking teammates, marking extraction points, and light discipline in low visibility. Watching glow sticks drift underwater has the same energy as watching jellyfish, beautiful, slow, and mildly existential. Perfect sleepy content. The SEAL Toolkit Philosophy. What makes SEAL tools interesting isn't the individual items. It's the philosophy behind them.
Use whatever works. Knives, old or new. Axes, why not? Bolt cutters, sure. Multi-tools, always. Glow sticks, absolutely. Underwater math boards, every time. The gear list looks like a hardware store married a science lab and then adopted a pack of vintage knives. It's practical, mismatched, and very human, which is probably why it's so oddly relaxing to talk about at 1 a.m. The era of smart rifles, modular madness, and SEAL gear that looks straight out of a sci-fi prop room. So, we've drifted through World War II frogmen gear, Cold War underwater toys, Vietnam favorites, the MP5 cult years, the M4 takeover, and the whole SEALs adopt literally anything that shoots era. And now, in this next stretch, we're gliding into what I'd call the everything is rails and optics and Bluetooth age. It's a peaceful, sleepy journey into weapons that look like they were designed by a committee of 30 engineers who all hated each other, yet somehow produced guns that work under mud, salt water, and the general chaos of SEAL life. So, yeah, let's lie back, relax, and float into the 21st century gear. The FN SCAR era. The rifle that tried to do everything. At some point in the mid-2000s, someone in SOCOM apparently said, "Hey, what if we made a rifle that looks like a stapler but shoots like a dream?" Enter the FN SCAR series. The name stands for Special Operations Forces Combat Assault Rifle, which is basically the weapons industry version of naming your child Gifted Prodigy Johnson. Very humble. The SCAR came in two main flavors. SCAR L, light, chambered in 5.56 millimeters, and SCAR H, heavy, chambered in 7.62 millimeters and approximately capable of knocking the attitude out of anything you pointed it at. SEALs, of course, adopted both, because why not have two rifles that do the job of one? It's tradition. The SCAR had a monolithic upper, a folding stock, a charging handle that would occasionally hit your knuckle, and a recoil impulse that felt like the gun was politely asking you to hold it tighter. Plus, a color palette that looked like desert tan meets organic peanut butter. And honestly, SEALs used it for years because it was reliable, accurate, and lighter than most 7.62 battle rifles. Sleep-friendly fact: the SCAR H got so popular among elite units that it started feeling like the cool kid rifle, while the SCAR L kind of drifted out of favor because the M4 still existed and refused to retire.
HK-416, the rifle that literally changed SEAL history. Now, here's where the vibe shifts into the, okay, this gun is a celebrity zone. Everyone knows the HK-416. Everyone, even people who don't know guns, know the HK-416. It's like the Beyoncé of carbines. It's the rifle that became famous because SEAL Team 6 used it for a certain 2011 nighttime visit to Abbottabad, a visit that ended with a very awkward moment for a certain person hiding upstairs. But let's stay in sleepy history mode. The HK-416 is basically an M4, but made by Germans, with a piston system that dramatically reduces fouling, and with enough reliability upgrades to make the M4 look like a thrift store prototype. SEALs adopted the HK-416 because it ran clean in sand, it ran clean underwater, it ran clean after firing a ridiculous number of rounds because SEALs test guns the way toddlers test new toys, by trying to break them. The HK-416 also came in multiple lengths: full length,
14.5-inch, 10.4-inch, personal favorite, the version that looks like a power tool. And the reason SEALs adore it? It's predictable, it's durable, and it hits exactly where you want, even if you've been awake for 30 hours eating nothing but protein bars and tactical stress. SIG MCX, the new, adjustable, multi-caliber wonder child. Then we float to the SIG MCX, which is basically the gun for operators who love saying the phrase, "Yeah, I can change calibers in like 2 minutes." It's modular, it's modern, it looks like a rifle that showed up to Comic-Con wearing tactical leggings. The MCX lets SEALs switch between 5.56mm and 300 Blackout, which is a cartridge beloved for being quiet, subsonic, and, as people like to say, the adult version of 45 ACP for rifles. This rifle is ideal for suppressed operations, which SEALs do fairly often. Like, if it doesn't have a suppressor, do we even want it? Often. Smooth recoil, short barrel setups, and a folding stock that can tuck in tighter than a suitcase on Spirit Airlines. It's modern SEAL minimalism. Kind of like, sure, we could bring a whole bunch of rifles, or we could bring just one that transforms like a calm little transformer. Precision rifles, the tools for when SEALs decide to be quiet overachievers. SEAL snipers have used everything over the decades. The MK11 Mod 0, the MK12 SPR, the M40 variants, the SR25, the Remington 700s, the MK13 Mod 7, the Macmillan rifles, and rifles whose names sound like computer motherboard models. But in the last decade, things have drifted slowly toward 300 Win Mag, 338 Lapua Magnum, and oh look, now everything has a suppressor the size of a Pringles can. The MK13 Mod 7 in particular became a SEAL classic. It shoots smooth, it reaches out far, and it delivers that "I'm not angry, just accurate" energy. And then there's the MRAT, which SOCOM started adopting because multi-caliber precision rifles are now the tactical equivalent of having a Swiss Army knife, but one that can hit targets over a mile away. Sidearms, because SEALs always have a backup plan. For decades, SEALs rotated through pistols like someone who can't decide what they want for dinner. SIG P226, the classic, the legend, the movie SEAL pistol. Glock 19, the practical, I work everywhere pistol. HK45C, the I lift heavy pistol. Glock 19 MOS, because optics suddenly became the new tactical makeup. SIG P320, M17/M18 variants, the modular newcomer. And of course the famous MK23, which was basically a pistol the size of a laptop computer. It was accurate, silent, and took up more space than most people's willpower. But modern SEALs lean more toward Glocks and SIGs because lighter, simpler, fewer moving parts, less drama. And honestly, drama is already abundant in military life, so the pistol shouldn't contribute. Suppressed weapons, the eternal SEAL fashion statement. By the mid-2000s, suppressors basically became SEAL cultural identity. Like, you show up without one, and people start asking if you're feeling okay. Every weapon gets a suppressor. Rifles, carbines, precision rifles, subguns, personal defense weapons, potentially someone's stapler if they figure out how. There is no such thing as too quiet. Modern suppressors reduce flash, reduce sound, reduce tactical headaches, and help maintain "please don't alert the guards" energy. Sure, they get hot enough to fry an egg, but SEALs already train in places that feel like frying pans, so it all balances out. Heavy weapons, when subtlety isn't the goal. SEALs also regularly use M240 machine guns, the definition of reliable but loud.
M2.5 cal, the classic "this is not a suggestion" weapon. MK48, lighter 7.62 machine gun. MK46, 5.56 millimeter version. MK47 AGL, the futuristic grenade launcher that looks like it wants its own movie deal. They bring these mostly when the mission has shifted from silent infiltration to, all right, let's remove this obstacle very persuasively. Modern optics, because seeing your target is kind of helpful. SEAL optics history can be summarized as early era, iron sights, maybe a scope if you're lucky. 1990s, red dots everywhere, technology. Mid-2000s, ACOGs, EOTechs, magnifiers, why not all at once? 2010s, LPVOs, because zoom is suddenly cool again. And 2020s, thermals on everything, because we're tired of guessing. Modern SEALs carry gear that would make a medieval archer cry from jealousy. Even pistols get optics now, because yes, even the backup weapon needs night vision compatibility.
Night vision, the true SEAL superpower. Night vision gear evolved from giant goggles, to smaller goggles, to dual tubes, to quad tubes, to you look like a cybernetic owl with student loans. Modern SEAL NVGs, lightweight, ultra clear, adjustable, terrifying to anyone who sees a silhouette wearing them. And yes, they do make the wearer feel like they have predator vision, which is both cool and mildly comedic when the goggles fog up. The era of the smart everything. Approx 4,000 plus words. Hey guys, welcome back to another long, cozy stretch of military history where nothing too exciting happens on purpose. So if you're sitting there with your blankets, your dim lights, and maybe your phone barely hanging on to 3% battery because you forgot to charge it again, don't panic. You've got plenty of time before this script ends. Tonight, we're just drifting deeper into the world of Navy SEAL weapons as things start to get, well, smarter. Because of course they do. Humans looked at bullets and said, what if these were Wi-Fi enabled? So now we enter the modern age, the age where SEAL gear quietly transitions from really tough-looking metal tools to basically a Best Buy display, but waterproof. Let's sink into it. The ghost-like rifles of the modern age. By the late 2000s and early 2010s, the SEAL teams had seen enough conflicts to know exactly what they wanted from a rifle. Something light, something modular, something that could survive sand, snow, salt water, swamp water, and probably a disappointing Frappuccino spill in a forward operating base. And that's why the SEALs embraced the HK-416, which we already floated through. But now something interesting happened. Manufacturers took notes. They noticed that elite units like the SEALs weren't just special forces, they were walking advertisements. A SEAL carried your rifle, the world wanted your rifle. A SEAL used your optic, your company suddenly sold out of everything. A SEAL held your flashlight, congratulations, your once struggling tactical accessory business was now a small empire. So everyone wanted to build the next SEAL rifle. Enter the MCX family. The SIG MCX is one of those rifles that looks like it was designed by someone who kept asking themselves, but what if it folded more? Because the entire platform is practically origami. Stock folds, barrel swap, calibers change, everything clicks apart like a child's dream version of Lego Technic. And the SEALs, naturally, liked it. Not because it was the fanciest rifle, but because it was quiet, reliable, suppressor-friendly, and not annoying to maintain. The MCX Rattler in particular, that tiny 5.5-inch barreled thing, looks less like a rifle and more like a power tool from the future. Which makes sense.
because SEALs needed something they could carry into extremely cramped environments. Think narrow hallways, jungle huts, ship interiors. Moving through a concrete maze at 3 in the morning, whispering to your teammates while not trying to bonk your rifle on every single metal pipe in existence. The Rattler solved that. And because it sounded cool, Rattler, everyone loved it even more. Marketing team, take a bow. The era of the smart everything. Older optics were pretty straightforward. You had a red dot, maybe a magnifier, maybe a scope if you were feeling fancy. But modern SEAL optics said, what if we put everything at once and call it a day? Let's glide through a few. EOTech EOT-EXPS series. The classic holographic window. It looks like a tiny TV screen that only displays a red circle and dot. SEALs like it because it's unbelievably fast. You can see the reticle from weird angles. It doesn't fog up like those $10 plastic goggles you wore in high school science class. And the circle with the dot reticle is basically a cheat code for quick aiming. Put the donut on the target, press, and move on with your evening. The Vortex Razor line. These are the scopes that look like someone took a normal rifle scope and fed it protein shakes for 8 months. Thick, durable, heavy, made for people who regularly slam their gear into walls because they never learned spatial awareness. SEALs use low-power variable optics when they need a rifle to do everything at once. A little like a multi-tool, except the multi-tool costs more than a motorcycle. Suppressors, now standard, not optional. There used to be a time when suppressors were optional cool gadgets you attached when the mission was sneaky enough. Now, suppressors are basically standard issue. Not just for stealth, but because it reduces hearing, it reduces recoil, it reduces muzzle flash, it helps communicate in tight spaces. It helps avoid alerting everyone within 5 miles. The military figured out something funny. When you reduce the noise inside a team of operators, they actually communicate more clearly. Groundbreaking! Someone probably got a PhD off that discovery. Modern SEAL suppressors include Surefire SOCOM series. These suppressors are basically welded bricks of metal that refuse to die. They're built to handle full auto, sand, mud, salt water, being dropped because someone tripped on a rock. If suppressors had personalities, Surefire suppressors would be that friend who quietly does their job while everyone else is arguing. SIG SLX and SLH series. These are the new generation, focused on reducing blowback, the unpleasant cloud of gas that comes back into your face like a rude little ghost. SEALs like suppressors that don't choke them out. Simple as that. The rise of smart accessories. This is where things get funny. Once optics improved, manufacturers realized they could improve also. Lights, lasers, rangefinders, even the rails on the rifle. Everything became smart, which sounds fancy, but it mostly means expensive and less annoying. Mayer laser units. One of the most popular modern SEAL laser systems is the B.E. Mayer's Maul, which looks like someone bolted a small spaceship onto the side of a rifle. But SEALs love it because it's bright, it's intuitive, it doesn't stick out like a boxy brick, and it doesn't snag on every twig, leaf, or unfortunate doorframe. Plus, it's ambidextrous. Lefties finally won something. Cloud defensive lights. These are flashlights that seem motivated by spite. Instead of making them small and elegant, Cloud Defensive went with pure brightness, pure durability, pure battery-eating power. SEALs appreciate lights that turn night into day because squinting at shadows gets old fast. Modern shotguns, still here, still loud. Even with all the advanced gear, SEALs still use shotguns mostly for breaching.
not running around like action movie characters. Benelli M4. This shotgun refuses to retire. It cycles everything, never jams, and somehow still works after being dropped in materials that should legally disqualify any machine from functioning. SEALs use it because doors exist, doors are annoying, and shotguns solve annoying things. The M4 is that reliable old friend who still shows up with energy while everyone else is exhausted. The precision side of modern sniping. We've talked about sniper rifles before, drifting slowly through their evolution like a calm little timeline. But now, in the modern era, things reach a new level. This area is dominated by
MK13 Mod 7, a precision rifle chambered in 300 Win Mag. Because sometimes you need to reach out and tap someone who lives very far away. It's sleek, modern, quiet when suppressed, and absurdly accurate. SEAL snipers use it because efficiency matters. Why shoot twice when you can shoot once and then go home? SIG MCX Spear, or MRGG. This is the future knocking on the door. A semi-auto rifle that promises the accuracy of a bolt gun. It's not fully adopted, not fully deployed everywhere, but SEALs are testing it, evaluating it, slowly drifting toward the idea of one rifle doing everything, because fewer systems equal fewer headaches, and fewer headaches equal a happier operator who might finally get 6 hours of sleep for once. The sidearm transition. We drift into pistols again because apparently pistols change every decade. SEALs had the SIG P226 for ages, then the Glock 19. Now they're experimenting again. SIG M18, compact military P320. Modular, light, adaptable. Basically the IKEA furniture of handguns, except it doesn't wobble. SEALs like it because the trigger is clean, it takes optics, it's easy to maintain, it works well suppressed.
And yes, optics on pistols are now normal. We are officially living in a future where even the small guns have tiny windows with glowing dots. The smart helmet era. Modern SEALs don't just grab rifles. They grab helmets that look like they belong in a video game. These helmets aren't just buckets. They're platforms. Night vision upgrades. Dual tubes became quad tubes. Quad tubes became panoramic systems. SEALs now see the night like cats with better funding. PVS 31, GPNVG 18, and newer prototypes. All allow operators to move flawlessly through pitch-black environments without tripping on rocks, chairs, or the occasional very angry goat. Integrated communication systems. Helmets now include built-in comms. No more tangled wires like some sort of early 2000s headphone disaster. Everything is wireless, encrypted, and hands-free. Imagine being able to coordinate a team quietly while underwater prep, climbing a ladder, and holding a suppressed MCX. That's the level of convenience we're talking about. Drones, the new teammates. Not the big ones, not the fancy Hollywood ones. Small drones. Pocket-sized drones. Little buzzing surveillance assistants that SEALs can launch quietly to peek around corners or scan rooftops. They don't carry weapons. They don't do anything dramatic. They're just floating reconnaissance buddies. Perfect for nighttime operations, perfect for reducing risk, perfect for operators who enjoy knowing what's waiting for them instead of guessing. The stealthy future on the horizon.
As we drift toward the late 2020s and early 2030s, a few trends become clear. Weapons will be quieter. Suppressors are now standard. Future suppressors will be lighter and more efficient. Weapons will be more modular. Rifles like the MCX already hint at this. Future rifles will swap calibers and barrels with almost no effort. Weapons will be smarter. Optics with internal processors. Rangefinders that adjust brightness automatically. Lasers that self-calibrate. Maybe even rifles that self-zero. Because of course they will. All right, welcome back to this very relaxed journey through the slow-moving ocean of SEAL weapon history. If you're still awake, congratulations, or apologies, depending on your expectations tonight. So let's drift right back into the world of weapons that were designed to solve problems before anyone even realized there was a problem. Because tonight we're floating into one category SEALs adore, almost as much as caffeine and waterproof everything, precision tools that whisper. And yes, this will be another long, steady glide across time. No rush, no tension, just you and the gentle hum of unnecessary military trivia at bedtime. Let's start with the M12 SPR, the not quite a sniper rifle. So imagine a rifle that can't quite decide what it wants to be. Like, it wakes up in the morning and thinks, well, I'm basically an M4, but what if I also wanted to be a sniper rifle, but not fully commit, because that sounds like too much responsibility. That is the M12 Special Purpose Rifle. SEALs started using it in the late 1990s and early 2000s when someone somewhere said, what if we want to hit things more accurately, but don't want to carry something big and annoying like a full sniper rifle? Enter the M12, a perfectly middle child rifle. It fired the 5.56 round, but with much more accuracy thanks to a longer barrel, match-grade ammo, and optics that actually made you feel like you could see your problems before they arrived. SEALs liked it because it offered more range than an M4, less bulk than a sniper rifle, and energy that said, I'm trying my best, okay? For a while, it became a beloved precision tool in certain platoons. But then newer rifles strutted onto the stage, as rifles tend to do, and the M12 quietly exited like a polite guest who realized he overstayed the party. Still, it was a classic era, and SEALs appreciate anything that tries its hardest while staying quiet about it. And then came the SR-25. The calm, medium-caliber problem solver. So now let's float gently over to the SR-25. If the M12 was a middle child trying to impress everyone, the SR-25 was more like the calm older brother who doesn't need to brag because he already knows he's good at things. This was a 7.62 millimeter rifle, which in human terms means it hit harder and farther than the 5.56 crowd. It wasn't meant for chaotic, kick-open-the-door energy. It was meant for slow, careful, I'm just going to sit here and make thoughtful decisions from 700 yards away. SEALs liked it because it reached out farther, hit harder, and allowed them to stay comfortably far away from whatever chaos was happening. The rifle had that clean precision energy that says, I will absolutely do this task, but please don't make me run while holding heavy things. The SR-25 eventually evolved into the Mark 11 and then into the M110,
because the U.S. military never met a name they didn't want to change every 5 to 7 years. The Mark 13 Mod 7, the long-range introvert. Now we slide into the modern precision world with the Mark 13 Mod 7. This thing fires .300 Winchester Magnum, which basically means the bullet wakes up and chooses professionalism. If rifles had personalities, 5.56 rifles are the hyper interns, 7.62 rifles are middle management, .300 Win Mag rifles are the quiet executives who only show up once a month but somehow get everything done. SEAL snipers love the Mark 13 for its ability to stay accurate at ridiculous distances, deliver enough power to make physics question itself, and still maintain that elegant, non-dramatic vibe. It's long, it's heavy, and it feels like the kind of weapon that would speak softly and use full sentences.
I'm working. But let's keep this between us. The modern suppressors used by SEALs come from companies like Surefire, Knight's Armament, and occasionally others whenever procurement gets spicy. These suppressors reduce noise, muzzle flash, and the general stress level of everyone involved. Perfect for bedtime story energy. Let's glide into the present day, modular systems. Because modern SEALs love modularity almost as much as they love waterproof Pelican cases. The MCX Spear/NGSW era. The military is currently evaluating weapons in the Next Generation Squad Weapon Program. SEALs have tested the SIG MCX Spear variants in 6.8 millimeters. MCX Rattler variants, and short-barrel MCXs for super compact missions. These rifles are like the modern multitasking millennials of the gun world. Lighter, ambidextrous, smartly designed, and constantly getting firmware updates, metaphorically speaking. They reflect the modern trend. One rifle platform, multiple calibers, dozens of configurations, zero interest in commitment. And finally, the weapons SEALs don't talk about. Every special operations unit has things they don't officially list in public. Prototypes, modified legacy weapons, borrowed foreign weapons, tools used only once for very specific missions, and gear that exists in procurement limbo. But the overall trend remains. SEAL weapons must be reliable, adaptable, and capable of working anywhere humans probably shouldn't be hanging out. Quiet professionals, quiet tools. The art of staying unseen. If you're still awake after the last section, congratulations. You've outlasted about 40% of Navy equipment procurement timelines, which is honestly impressive. So let's drift deeper into the world of SEAL weapons, but this time, quieter. Because as much as Hollywood wants you to believe SEALs are always charging into danger, dual-wielding pistols on a jet ski, most of the time, they're doing the exact opposite. They're sneaking. They're crawling. They're whispering into headsets like they're ordering takeout. And most importantly, they're carrying weapons that are designed to not wake up the neighbors. So let's settle in, get comfortable, maybe adjust your pillow a bit, and float into the sleepy world of suppressed firepower. The rise of suppressors in SEAL culture. SEALs have always loved silence. It's practically a personality trait at this point. But early suppressors? Well, let's just say they used to heat up faster than a laptop running Chrome with 47 tabs open. The early quiet guns were good, but not perfect. They reduced noise,
Sometimes. They avoided muzzle flash? Mostly. And they stayed cool? Absolutely never. Still, SEALs adapted. That's kind of their thing. By the early 2000s, suppressors had gone from optional cool attachment to please never leave home without it, especially because modern operations leaned heavily towards stealth raids, ship takedowns, and the kind of missions where noise equals paperwork. And nobody likes paperwork. The Knight's Armament NT-4, the suppressor that just wouldn't die. SEALs used the KAC-NT-4 for what felt like geological epochs. This suppressor was heavy, loudish, and built like a metal thermos that somebody welded shut. Yet somehow it became the most iconic suppressed accessory in special operations. You could beat it with a brick. You could drop it in the ocean. You could run it over with a Toyota Hilux, the official vehicle of all conflict zones, and it would still function. Sure, newer suppressors came out, sure, technology moved forward, but SEALs kept the NT-4 around like an old pair of boots they refused to throw out, because sometimes reliability beats innovation, especially when the alternative might explode near your face. The SIG SLX suppressors, the new age of let's not blow out our eardrums. Eventually, SEALs joined the rest of the modern world and adopted the SIG SLX series. They're lighter, cooler, quieter, and they vent gas better than the AC system in a Las Vegas casino. These suppressors were designed with one goal: make suppressed rifles actually comfortable to shoot. No more gas blowing back into your nose. No more temporary deafness. No more coughing like you have just inhaled powdered drywall. The SLX line became the SEAL standard for the newest rifles, the MCX Rattler, Spear, and pretty much everything else SIG makes that looks futuristic enough to scare budget committees. But let's drift back to the quiet guns before modern times. The HK Merc 23 SOCOM pistol. This thing wasn't a pistol, it was a brick with a trigger. A very quiet brick, yes, but still a brick. The Merc 23 was massive because the SEALs told HK and Coach, build us a pistol that never breaks, never jams, and can attach a suppressor the size of a soda can. And HK and Coach said, okay, but it's going to be huge. And SEALs said, cool. The suppressor made the Merc 23 whisper quiet. The pistol made operators look like they were holding a cordless drill. It was heavy, slow to draw, but extremely accurate. Eventually, everyone realized that this thing was more suited for hunting than special operations, and the SEALs quietly retired it like a beloved but impractical family pet. Quiet SMGs, because stealth needed its own category. The MP5SD, the Whisper King. If the MP5 is the prom king of SMGs, the MP5SD is the mysterious quiet kid who never talks but somehow gets perfect grades. The SD variant has an integrally suppressed barrel, meaning every shot is quiet, even with full power ammo, and it sounds like someone dropping a stapler into a pillow. SEALs use this weapon during shipboardings, hostage rescues, and pretty much anything indoors. It was perfect for tight spaces, tight hallways, and tighter mission timelines. It stayed in service for decades because, honestly, it was just too good at its job.
Let's glide into bolt-action territory, the Remington 700 family. Before all the fancy modern gear, SEALs were quietly working with something super old school, the Remington 700 series. This bolt-action rifle has been around longer than most modern snack foods, and SEALs kept using versions of it because, well, it just worked. It's the rifle equivalent of a vintage truck. Not flashy, not complicated, just
dependable, and slightly stubborn in a charming way. Versions like the M24 and M40 weren't exclusive to SEALs, but special operations units often customized them with high-end optics, sound suppressors, and barrels that looked like they could double as sturdy furniture legs. These rifles had a slow, deliberate pace, which fits our sleepy vibe beautifully. One shot at a time. One bolt lift at a time. No rush. Just calm, controlled precision. Now, the other quiet tools. Suppressed pistols. Because sometimes the mission is, please be as quiet as possible. No, quieter than that. Okay, quieter still. And that's where SEALs bring out their suppressed pistols. The HK Mark 23, the handgun that thought it was a tank. This thing was huge. It was basically a pistol with the size of a brick, the weight of medium regret, and an attitude that said, I will not be concealed, and you cannot make me. SEALs used the Mark 23 because it was ridiculously reliable and could handle suppressors easily. But eventually they realized carrying a refrigerator-sized handgun wasn't very fun. The HK-45CT, the sensible replacement. This one was smaller, lighter, less dramatic. It still took suppressors well and didn't look like it was compensating for something. SEALs liked it because it did the job without needing a dedicated backpack. The MK-25, the old reliable sidearm. SEALs famously used the SIG P226-based MK-25 for years. It was smooth, accurate, and durable enough to handle both saltwater and the salty attitudes of elite operators. It had good ergonomics, good accuracy, and no desire to draw attention. Exactly the kind of personality a bedtime historian appreciates. And now let's drift into underwater weapons. Because SEALs are amphibious, because the ocean is there, and because the idea of special forces firing weapons underwater is just too bizarre not to include. The Mark I underwater defense gun. This thing fired tiny steel darts underwater. Not bullets, darts. Because apparently someone thought SEALs needed to cosplay as underwater librarians armed with filing cabinet accessories. It wasn't accurate, it wasn't powerful, but underwater, accuracy is kind of a myth anyway. This weapon was retired quietly, because let's be honest, it was a weird idea that overstayed its welcome. The APS underwater rifle. Imported from the Soviets, because why not borrow from the people you're competing against? It fired 120mm long steel darts and worked underwater fairly well. Above water, it fired about as effectively as throwing a stapler. SEALs used it mostly for testing, curiosity, and the eternal human question, what if? Then we float to something bigger, crew-served weapons. Sometimes SEALs need more firepower. And by more, I mean significantly more, but still delivered calmly at bedtime. The M240 machine gun. This 7.62mm machine gun is reliable, accurate, and designed to run forever as long as someone occasionally whispers encouragement. SEALs use it for boat defense, perimeter security, and politely discouraging anyone who wanders too close. The M2 .50 caliber, the grandpa of American firepower. This weapon is older than many grandparents. It was invented in the 1930s, and SEALs still use it because, well, why wouldn't they? It's heavy, loud, though we won't mention that too much, and famously simple. If a weapon could say, "I've been doing this job for 90 years, leave me alone," it would be the M2. The MK-48, the lighter machine gun that isn't actually light. SEALs love compact firepower, but compact is relative. The MK-48 is lighter than an M240, heavier than your expectations, and fires 7.62 millimeter rounds fast enough to impress gravity. It's used when SEALs need portable firepower that still packs authority. Not fun to carry, but very appreciated. Let's drift into grenade launchers, calmly, gently, ignoring the fact that grenades are not calming objects. The M70, Thumper. The grenade launcher is so simple and charming that SEALs kept using it long after it became outdated. It's basically a wooden stock, a metal barrel, and a vibe that says, "Back in my day, we launched grenades with dignity." SEALs liked its accuracy and reliability, and also because sometimes simple things are comforting, like cereal or low-maintenance pets. The M203, underbarrel convenience. This launcher attaches to rifles and allows SEALs to fire grenades without bringing an entire separate tool. It's the Swiss Army knife of explosions, compact, useful, slightly overconfident. The M320, the modernized version. Same concept, better ergonomics, detachable, and it doesn't make people miss the M70 quite so much. And now, the big, quiet elephant in the room, suppressors. SEALs love suppressors. They use them on almost everything. A suppressed rifle says,
The MP7, when SMGs got tired of being outdated. SEALs later picked up the HK MP7, the world's favorite tiny tactical Nerf gun, except this one shoots armor-piercing rounds at 2,400 feet per second. With a suppressor attached, the MP7 became light, fast, compact, and still quieter than most rifles. Perfect for VIP extractions. Perfect for vehicle ops. Perfect for hiding under a jacket like some kind of tactical fashion statement. It wasn't meant to replace rifles, just to fill a very niche role. I need to be quiet, but I also might need to shoot through a bad guy's body armor. Suppressed sniper tools. The gentle long-range whisperer. You can't talk SEAL weapons without mentioning the silent long-range stuff. MK13 Mod 7. This rifle is basically a laser pointer for grown-ups, except instead of a tiny red dot, it fires a .300 Winchester Magnum bullet that stays supersonic for absurd distances. SEAL snipers sometimes attach suppressors not for stealth, but for comfort and recoil reduction. Because if you're spending all might lying in a bush waiting for something to happen, the last thing you want is tinnitus. The MK22 ASR, the new multi-caliber whisperer. This sniper rifle is the equivalent of a Swiss Army knife. It eats 3 calibers, it reaches a mile away, it suppresses beautifully, and it adjusts to different missions like it's changing outfits for a photo shoot. It's quietish for a sniper rifle, but mostly it's precise. Like, I can hit a coin at stupid distances precise. But let's drift further into the niche quiet weapons. The M79 pirate gun, yes, this story is real.
Here's a fun one. SEALs used to cut down the M79 grenade launcher into a tiny handheld version. It looked like something Jack Sparrow would use if he got bored. And yes, they suppressed grenade launchers at one point. Because SEALs like to ask the question, what if we could do something that makes absolutely no logical sense on paper, and then do it anyway? Suppressed shotguns. The odd experiments. Shotguns are not quiet at all. They're basically handheld explosions, but SEALs tried suppressing them anyway. These bizarre hush shotguns were mostly used for breaching tests and extremely specific missions. They worked okay-ish, but suppressors would heat up, warp, clog, and cry for help. SEALs eventually abandoned the idea, but not before creating several truly cursed prototypes. Modern SEAL teams. Suppressors on nearly everything. Today, almost every standard SEAL rifle has a suppressor by default, partly because stealth is nice, partly because hearing protection is great, and partly because suppressed rifles just look cooler, even if operators won't say it. Aesthetics matter. And honestly, if you're getting your photograph taken for recruitment posters, you might as well look good. And let's drift slowly toward the next section. We've talked rifles, we've talked SMGs, we've talked pistols, and strange suppressed science experiments. Up next, we move into the specialized, rare, and why does this even exist weapons that SEALs have used across decades. The weird stuff, the forgotten stuff, the someone actually approved funding for this stuff. Continuing the calm, sleepy deep dive into SEAL weapons. No images, just pure bedtime history vibes. Let's drift right back in. The suppressed era. Why SEALs fell in love with quiet toys. So, at this point in history, SEALs had already collected more firearms than a doomsday prepper with a Costco-sized budget. But starting in the late 1990s and early 2000s, one trend took over their loadouts like it was the latest TikTok challenge. Suppression. Not silencers. Because yes, let's add the classic sleep time historian reminder, silencers don't silence anything. They just make loud, deadly bangs slightly less antisocial. SEALs, being professionals who prefer not to announce their arrival like Walmart shoppers at Black Friday, embraced suppressed weapons like long-lost soulmates. The Knights Armament era. Knights Armament pretty much became the Beyoncé of suppressor makers. If you were Cole, you used KAC. If you weren't, well, you still wanted to. Their suppressors paired with the Mark 12, Mark 18, and even the early M4A1s helped SEALs avoid ear destruction, communicate without shouting, and sneak around more effectively than a teenager trying not to wake their parents at 2 a.m. The Mk23 pistol was famously issued with a gigantic suppressor that looked like something a comic book villain would carry. A weapon so large and awkward that SEALs respected it but rarely loved it. Because imagine trying to stuff that thing in a holster. It's like holstering a submarine. The rise of integrally suppressed weapons. SEALs eventually said, what if, and hear me out, the gun was born suppressed? And thus came integrally suppressed systems. The MP5 SD. The OG whispering SMG. It wasn't new, but SEALs used it extensively. An MP5 that already had a suppressor built inside its barrel. This thing whispered like it was sharing gossip at a sleepover. Ideal for ship takedowns, nighttime hostage rescues, and situations where being loud would ruin literally everything.
The downside is it used 9mm rounds that sometimes bounced off enemies wearing heavy jackets, which is not ideal. Try explaining that in an after-action report. Yes, sir, we hit him. Several times. He just didn't care.
The honey badger, because why not have a gun with a cute name? In the early 2010s, operators started experimenting with the AAC Honey Badger, a compact, integrally suppressed rifle firing 300 AAC blackout rounds. It was light, quiet, adorable, and deadly. Everything a SEAL wants in a relationship. Though not officially adopted widely, its concept heavily influenced what came next. The SOCOM 338 Dream. At some point, U.S. SOCOM basically wanted a sniper rifle that could reach farther, hit harder, and still be suppressed, while somehow being as portable as a backpack. Because of course they did. Enter the 338 Norma Magnum and 338 Lapua Magnum era. These rounds could reach out to distances that would make an Olympic archer go home and cry. SEALs deployed weapons like the Barrett MRAD, Mk-22 Mod O, and older 338 Lapua sniper platforms. Suddenly, far became ridiculously far. If older sniper rifles could shoot across a valley, these could shoot across the valley, the farmhouse, the next field, and maybe into someone's evening barbecue. Quietly, too. Why suppression became a requirement, not a luxury. By the mid-2010s, most SEAL rifles in active use were fully suppressed, short-barreled, lightweight, modular, and painted in colors that looked like someone spilled a frappuccino on them. If a SEAL ever fired unsuppressed, everyone looked at him like he had committed a war crime against the team's eardrums. The philosophy of quiet combat. Here's the cozy historian explanation. SEALs don't want big firefights. Not because they're scared. They're not. It's because stealth is safer, surprise is efficient, and loud noises attract unwanted consequences. Also, tinnitus is not a personality trait anyone wants. So modern SEAL teams often gear up as if their weapons have an invite to the Met Gala of suppressors. Mk-18 with surefire SOCOM suppressor, HK-416 with suppressor, Glocks with suppressors, sniper rifles with suppressors, designated marksman rifles with suppressors. Basically, if it shoots, it's silenced. Except the guy who always forgets his ear protection. He's just doomed. Handgun evolution into the 2020s. Let's drift gently into sidearms again, because the quiet handgun game evolved too. Glock 19, the SEAL's new best friend. By the 2010s, SEALs phased out the SIG P216. It was iconic. It was reliable. It was also heavy, old school, and kind of like using a flip phone in the age of smartphones. Enter Glock 19. Why SEALs loved it? Lighter, simpler, more customizable, more corrosion-resistant, fits better with suppressors, magazines everywhere, and practically unkillable. There's a running joke that if you bury a Glock in sand for a year, it will still work better than a brand new Italian espresso machine. It also accepts threaded barrels, so suppressors attach neatly, again, feeding the quiet obsession. SEALs also adopted ultra-small weapons specifically for concealment or very tight spaces. SIG MPX. Think of it as the MP5's modern, cooler nephew. Lightweight, modular, 9mm, and works beautifully suppressed. Perfect for embassy evacuations,
inside ships, embassy operations, VIP protection, covert use. Basically anywhere where shooting loudly is frowned upon, which is most places, really. Underwater guns, because seals are seals. Yes, there are underwater firearms. No, they are not common. But because seals are half amphibious creatures, they sometimes train with specialized underwater weapons. The Russian APS underwater rifle gets talked about a lot because it looks like a weird metal broomstick. The U.S. uses other systems, mostly classified, with multi-environment rounds. A normal bullet underwater is just a disappointed, confused bubble machine. So SEALs tested rounds shaped like long darts, hydrodynamic projectiles. Not much is publicly known, but the concept is simple. Underwater gun shoots little metal spears. Spears don't care about water resistance. Divers don't become snacks for territorial sea creatures. Fun bedtime fact. The era of attachments, upgrades, and quiet improvements. Hey guys, welcome back. If you're still awake, honestly, congratulations. Because at this point, we've covered enough weapons to arm a small island nation. But tonight, we drift into one of the more strangely soothing chapters of SEAL weapon history. The era when the guns didn't change much, but the attachments absolutely did. This is when the military basically decided, yeah, the rifles are fine, but what if we made them look like a sci-fi prop from a mid-budget Netflix series? And of course, the SEALs said, perfect, we'll take 6. So let's float into this world of laser dots, suppressors that cost more than your car, and optics that probably have more computing power than Cold War satellites. It's a cozy place, a sleepy place, a place where nothing is dramatically new, but everything is just a little better than it was last year.
The golden age of rails, mounts, and tactical overgrowth. If you've ever seen a SEAL rifle from the 1990s, it's pretty bare. Maybe a small light, maybe a slightly overworked optic, maybe some tape. But by the late 2000s, the rifles started looking like they were auditioning for a Star Wars spin-off. There were rails on the rails, there were mounts to attach more mounts, there were accessories that needed other accessories to support the accessories. A SEAL armorer from that era probably needed a PhD in both aerospace engineering and Lego architecture. And all of it existed for a simple reason. Working in the dark, underwater, in sandstorms, in jungles, on rooftops, or in random corners of the Middle East meant the rifle had to be a fully customizable toolbox. The idea wasn't make the gun cool. It was make the gun helpful, even on the worst Tuesday imaginable. Which, to be fair, the Navy is pretty good at. Backup sights, in case life gets annoying. Optics break, screens fog, batteries die, gravity happens. So SEALs always keep flip-up iron sights on their rifles, not because they want to use them, but because the universe sometimes says, surprise! They fold neatly out of the way and pop up instantly when needed. It's the seatbelt of rifle accessories. You hope you never need it, but you're really glad it's there. Slings, the most underrated tool ever. If you've never used a sling, you might think it's just a strap. But ask anyone who has carried a rifle for hours. A sling is sanity. SEALs use 2-point or single-point setups depending on the mission. 2-point is stable, good for long patrols, good for not losing your mind. Single-point is mobile, good for room clearing, good for that cool tactical bounce you've seen in movies. A sling isn't exciting, but it might be the most essential accessory after the magazine. The Quiet Kings, SEAL suppressors, subsonic tricks, and the art of not making noise. So,
Let's drift into something the SEALs arguably obsess over more than guns, boats, tech, or even caffeine: not making noise. Because nothing ruins a perfectly good midnight raid like someone accidentally sounding like a lawnmower. And across SEAL history, suppressors weren't just accessories. They were basically the sacred relics of the "please don't hear me" religion. Let's sink into it, slowly, quietly, like a suppressed .22 that nobody invited. The beginning, Vietnam, and the era of good enough, probably, suppressors. The early suppressors SEALs worked with weren't sophisticated, and they definitely weren't sexy. A lot of the time they were handmade, hand-tuned, hand-abused, and occasionally hand-ruined by humidity, rust, or just bad luck. One of the favorites? The well-rod pistol. Yes, this thing, again. The grandpa slipper of suppressed weapons. It didn't look like a gun, it didn't sound like a gun, and honestly, it didn't act like one either. But it was quiet, almost too quiet. If you fired it in the jungle, the loudest sound was often a confused frog nearby. SEALs loved it for certain jobs, the kind of jobs everyone pretends didn't happen. And we gently glide past that. The rifle suppressor that tried its best, early SEAL AR-15 suppressors. These things heated up faster than a microwave burrito. After 5 or 6 shots, they could glow like someone shoved a lightsaber into a tube. Still, they made the rifle less loud, which is about the highest praise anyone could give early suppressors. Fast forward, enter "please respect my eardrums" technology. By the 2000s, suppressor tech evolved into something that wouldn't melt itself into pudding after a magazine dump. Modern SEAL suppressor philosophy revolves around sound reduction, flash suppression, back pressure control, not choking the shooter with gas, not announcing your existence like a bad fireworks display. And that's where the Knights Armament suppressor family became the Quiet Kings. Knights NT4, the seal of SEAL approval. This suppressor lived on more SEAL rifles than sunscreen lived on their noses. It wasn't the quietest suppressor ever, or the lightest, or the prettiest, but it was sturdy, near rust-proof, reliable, easy to maintain, and it didn't randomly explode. That last part is surprisingly important. The NT4 stayed in service for almost 2 decades, basically becoming the dad-bod suppressor everyone still respects. Enter the surefire era, the quiet, clean, low-gas future. At some point, Surefire came in and said, what if suppressors didn't hate the shooter? And that was an appealing idea. So SEAL rifles upgraded again. The SOCOM 2 suppressors became standard on MK-18, MK-16, MK-17, MK-27, HK-416 variants, basically anything with a rail. Surefire suppressors were lighter, cleaner, less gassy, less likely to make your night vision look like a glowing flashbang party, and they survived torture tests that would make most suppressors file for early retirement. Subsonic ammo, the SEALs' bedtime favorite. SEALs sometimes used subsonic ammunition for prisoner snatches, covert surveillance, close-range elimination, any mission involving dogs, goats, chickens, or a sleeping guard. Subsonic ammo removes the crack of a bullet breaking the sound barrier, but it also removes a decent chunk of power. So SEALs usually paired subsonic rounds with MP5SD, HK416 with special suppressors, integrally suppressed platforms, and sometimes suppressed bolt guns. Because what's more quiet than a suppressed semi-auto? A suppressed bolt action. It's like a whisper apologizing for existing. The MP5SD, the incredibly polite submachine gun. We mentioned it earlier, but the MP5SD deserves more sleepy praise. This thing wasn't just suppressed, it was born suppressed. The suppressor was built into the gun itself. It made 9mm ammo subsonic automatically, like a magical quietness generator. It was so quiet, SEALs joked that the loudest part of shooting it was the bolt casually cycling. It stayed in service for decades, mostly because nobody wanted to say goodbye to something that behaved so well.
Integrally suppressed rifles. SEALs love a quiet overachiever. A few SEAL teams experimented with integrally suppressed 5.56 rifles, integrally suppressed 300 blackout AR platforms, integrally suppressed 22 LR kits for training and other things. The 300 blackout especially became a favorite. Why? Because it hits harder than 9mm, but stays as quiet as a guilty conscience. The modern age, no more loud guns unless you want them loud. Today's SEAL arsenal includes suppressors that are heat-resistant, flash-resistant, gas-balanced, quick detach, and practically indestructible. Even the machine guns get suppressors now, because apparently nothing says stealth like a suppressed, belt-fed weapon that still rattles the bones of anyone within 3 zip codes. And as always, the gear evolves. SEALs don't cling to tradition unless it's working. They upgrade constantly. Today's suppressors are infinitely better than Vietnam's. The night vision evolution, from blurry green mess to I can see your soul. Here we go, continuing your long, sleepy, weapons used by U.S. Navy SEALs past to present script. Calm, sleepy, slightly snarky, no excitement, just soft historical drifting. Drifting into the era of SEAL optics, gadgets, and quiet tech. If you're still awake at this point, congratulations, you've officially stayed conscious longer than most World War II frogmen after swimming 2 miles in cold surf. But anyway, let's gently slide forward. Tonight we're drifting into the world of SEAL gadgets. And trust me, this is where American tax dollars quietly vanish into tiny black boxes stamped with "Classified, don't ask." You know how every military documentary says the SEALs carry the most advanced gear in the world? Yeah, that's basically true. But no one ever explains that half of the gear looks like it was purchased from a hardware store and then sprinkled with some tactical seasoning. So let's keep the lights dim, breathe slowly, and float through the sleepy evolution of SEAL optics, lasers, gadgets, and all the stuff that makes the guns go from just a gun to a small NASA project. Night vision. The SEALs totally required because they refused to work in the daylight tool set. The first rule of special operations is don't fight fair. The second rule is don't even fight when the sun is out. And SEALs have taken both rules extremely seriously. AN/PVS-5, the headache goggles, 1970s to 1980s. Imagine wearing binoculars filled with green fog. Now imagine those binoculars weighing more than a newborn baby. Congrats, you're wearing the PVS-5. SEALs used them anyway, because the alternative was bumping into palm trees during missions, which, frankly, isn't very elite. But they got the job done. Mostly, if you didn't turn your head too fast. Let's drift forward. AN/PVS-7, the we're getting warmer monocular era, 1990s to 2000s. Still bulky, still green, still making everyone look like a confused raccoon. But they were better, lighter, more durable, less I'm blind but pretending I'm not. SEALs used these through the Gulf War, Somalia, and all the early GWOT years.
Now relax, because here comes the upgrade that changed everything. AN-PVS-15 and AN-PVS-31, the twin green moons. 2 tubes, 2 intensifiers, 2 very expensive ways of saying, yes, I can see you even though you can't see me. The PVS-31 in particular is a SEAL favorite. It's feather-light, battery-efficient, and looks like something a sci-fi electrician would wear while repairing a warp core. SEALs love these things, mostly because they can finally look cool during night raids instead of looking like sleep-deprived scorpions. Breathe in and drift to the next gadget. Thermal optics, because sometimes body heat is easier to spot than humans. SEAL teams have used thermal optics since the early 2000s, and honestly, they're kind of magical. FLIR recon systems, the "yeah, we can see you behind that bush" tools. Thermals don't care about camouflage. Thermals don't care about darkness. Thermals don't care about walls sometimes. To a SEAL with FLIR, every warm-blooded enemy looks like a glowing marshmallow. Very convenient, very sleepy. Just a soft white blob drifting across the screen. There's something inherently funny about the idea that billion-dollar military operations sometimes come down to he looked like a warm potato on infrared, so we grabbed him. Laser aiming modules. Quiet lines of light no one else can see. Aiming in the dark used to be guesswork. But then America invented lasers. Because of course America invented lasers. ANPEQ-2, the early brick that glowed. Heavy, awkward, looked like someone taped a VHS player to an M4. SEALs used it anyway. ANPEQ-15, the beloved tactical staple. This is the SEAL laser. Infrared beam for aiming, infrared illuminator for lighting up rooms, visible laser option when you feel dramatic. Every photo of modern SEALs, yeah, the little rectangular box on the rifle is an IR laser. No one else can see the beam unless they also have night vision, which is a nice flex. Let's float onward. Suppressors, not silent, just politely quiet. Hollywood says suppressors make guns whisper. SEAL suppressors do not whisper. They just take the ear-destroying sound and downgrade it to mildly rude. Early suppressors, Vietnam to 1990s. Basically, metal tubes with questionable engineering. They worked in the same way taping a pillow to a gun works. Surefire SOCOM suppressors, modern era. These are the gold standard, designed to survive salt water, sand, explosions, and the general emotional chaos of combat. They reduce flash, they reduce recoil, they reduce noise, they do not reduce taxpayer suffering. Take a slow breath, because suppressors are just the start. Communication gear, the reason SEALs can whisper from a mile away. SEALs do not shout, it's not very stealthy, so communication gear has always mattered. Early frogmen, hand signals and hope. Pretty much nothing else. Maybe a rope tug if things got fancy. PRC radios, Cold War to GWOT. Heavy, reliable, annoying to carry.
Routinely soaked in salt water, because SEALs apparently love ruining electronics. Modern systems, headsets, ear pro and micro mics.
Now SEALs use noise-canceling headsets, bone conduction systems, encrypted radios. I swear I'm not talking to myself throat mics. It's basically AirPods Pro, but for warfare. Let's drift to something more watery. Underwater technology, because SEALs love making their lives miserable. SEALs were originally created to do underwater sabotage. That meant lots of gear that hated existing in seawater. Diving rebreathers, the "don't make bubbles or you'll die" machines. Rebreathers recycle exhaled air so no bubbles appear on the surface. Great for stealth, terrible for comfort. One small mistake, and the machine fills your bloodstream with oxygen toxicity. So yeah, relaxing. SEALs still use Draeger R-LAR-V, R-LAR-VI, and other quietly terrifying setups. They look like backpacks designed by angry scuba instructors. DPVs and underwater scooters. Imagine a waterproof motorcycle with no seat. You hang on to it while it drags you through black water at 3 knots. It's not fast, it's not comfortable, but it keeps SEALs from swimming ocean marathons. Climbing, breaching, and entry tools. SEAL missions often come down to 2 questions. 1. How do we get in? And 2. How do we get out? This requires tools. Halligan tools. Basically a glorified crowbar. But SEALs use them to pry open doors, windows, crates, and occasionally their own gear containers. Hydraulic spreaders, the mini jaws of life. Used for metal doors, vehicle entry, and making enemies regret choosing reinforced locks. Explosive breaching gear. This is the gentle, sleepy art of blowing doors off hinges. They use strip charges, linear charges, and frame charges. Everything from toothpaste tube-sized explosives to entire door-shaped sheets of boom. But we're whispering about it, so imagine all explosions happening in slow motion, like soft fireworks, but on steel. And now we drift to the one category SEALs love the most. All right, if you're somehow still awake after all that quiet wandering through the gear closets, dive lockers, forgotten prototypes, and increasingly questionable Navy procurement decisions, then honestly, congratulations. You have stronger mental stamina than most actual operators. But for the rest of you, which is probably most of you, you're already halfway asleep, drifting somewhere between tactical relaxation mode and I might actually start snoring, so let's slow things down even more. Tonight, we trace the long, weirdly peaceful story of weapons that were never meant to be peaceful. Tools designed for missions no one hears about, carried by people whose names rarely get mentioned. And yet, in this soft, sleepy corner of YouTube, they all become the world's gentlest bedtime characters. Because why not end the day thinking about suppressed rifles, underwater dart guns, and gear that costs more than your car? Thank you for hanging out, for relaxing, for listening, and for letting history, even military history, become something quiet enough to fall asleep to. If you're still awake, go ahead and dim the screen, maybe stretch a little, and drift off whenever you're ready. And if you already fell asleep 20 minutes ago, well,
Future you will hear this part in the morning. Either way, good night, sleep well, and I'll see you in the next sleepy dive into history's strangest corners. Rest easy, guys.